Hi everyone, welcome back to Bodhi Tree Buddhism. My name is Matthew Osborne and I'm live streaming here, though there'll be a recording up later on from Oxford. And today we're continuing with what is our fifth series of classes here at Bodhi Tree Buddhism, and we're looking at a modern classic from the Chinese traditions by the great scholar monk by the name of Venerable Unwholesome, and the name of that word to Tao. It's a real classic text. It's the sort of thing that, at least in Taiwan and Hong Kong, you will find it on the bookshelves of sort of almost any monastery of the Chinese traditions. There's an English translation out there that you can get your hands on, though for these classes I'm using my own translations of the verses and then providing my own commentary and explanation. So just letting you know if you're new to the courses at all. Otherwise, if you're not, then you know where we are continuing from today. So I think we're up to class 13 or 14, something like that. And we're continuing on with the Dharma common to the five vehicles, right? So remember those five vehicles, and the five vehicles are based on the goal of your practice. So what you want to be, basically. The human vehicle, the divine vehicle, the vehicle that leads to arahantship, the vehicle of the Prajika Buddhas, and of course the great vehicle, the path of the Bodhisattvas who wish to attain full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. So these five are kind of built up, you kind of imagine it like a pyramid, and so the basic practices there, the vehicle is to be a human, in other words, happiness in this life and also happiness in future lives, being reborn in a fairly happy, safe, secure situation and should we say body, and to be reborn as a human rather than something else that might be a bit more troublesome, is in the foundation for the higher levels as well. And that whole section started off with right view, and that's what we were looking at last week, right? We were looking at this idea of right view and what constitutes basic Buddhist right view. So we're going to continue with that today. Let me jump on in. I hope the documents are coming up here. Yes, they are. Whoop, and I've just realized that I need to tidy this up a bit more. Get rid of that bit. Let's get rid of the little bit on the side and knock the size of this up. I'm going to change the font. Sorry, I normally do this before we even begin, but just didn't quite notice today. Okay, hopefully this will kick in a second. Hopefully. In the meantime, maybe I should go back to the regular camera while my word is updating. Here we go. Okay, there we go. So on to our text. Oh, no, still a bit laggy. My apologies for that, not very professional of me. Okay, so where were we up to? Last week we looked at this section here, right? So if I can just go up it there. The Dharma common to the five vehicles. We talked about right view, which is basically like a worldview, your understanding of how the world works. And the first bit was talking about this idea that the mind can be pure or impure, and that there are certain states of mind, afflicted states of mind, that are considered impure. And when we speak and we act driven by those states of mind, craving, anger, jealousy, pride, ignorance, for example, this leads to an unwholesome action, karma. And conversely, when the mind doesn't have those negative states, or has what we might call positive corollaries, so for example, generosity, kindness, compassion, and so forth, insight, clarity, then this is a purified state of mind, and the actions that we perform under the influence of such a state of mind are pure states or pure actions, or we can call them wholesome actions. It's a little bit abstract. This whole section here is right view, so it is quite abstract. But I also mentioned the last time, don't look at this as like, oh, that's just the theory. We've got to have the practice, because part of Buddhist practice is to have a correct understanding in the first place. You can't just sort of separate them like that. Now, the next part of this section on right view is what we've got here. Your Bao, the existence of karma, or action, and retribution. So throughout this, I think I'm largely using the word karma. If you like, you can substitute in the word action in your head. And also remember, it's got to be sort of like an intentional action. It's got to have some like driving force behind it. It's not simply the action of accidentally stepping on a spider. That isn't a karma, because there was no intention to do anything towards that spider, for example. And I also noted, I think last week, that often in English we use the word karma to talk about like the result of an action. You say, oh man, bad karma, dude. Well, it's not really bad karma, what's happened to you. What we really mean to say, if we use Buddhist, more technical terminology, is you've done some bad action in the past, you've done some unwholesome karma, and now this is the unpleasant result of that. Or sometimes we talk about karma as being the relationship between the cause and the result. In Chinese, you'd call that ye bao, so karma, action, and retribution. Now, this section here's got a lot of kind of like quite important points, so it's pretty dense, but we just slowly work our way through it. So the first bit here, 有报必有业，微小转广大，能隐或能满，决定或不定，先生或后报，主业不失坏。The existence of retribution must be due to karma, of which minor karma can become large retribution. Inducing karma and completing karma, firmly fixed karma and not fixed karma, karma giving retribution in the present life or future lives. Karmas are never lost or ineffective. Now the first line here is probably more commonly expressed in a somewhat different way. Not to say that the existence of retribution must be due to karma, but simply that karmas, intentional acts, they will have some kind of retribution or some kind of result of that. And if we pair that from the first line there, right, that's what we're just talking about there, this first line, I'd like to just jump immediately into this one here. And those karmas, those actions, are never lost or ineffective. So if one engages in that intentional action, there will be a result, but when the result is going to happen, that's not 100% like fixed. It's not like immediate or something like that. It's quite complex, depends on many conditions for the ripening and the fruition of that. But even if the result doesn't occur, it's never lost and it's never ineffective. It's still about to happen. It's going to happen, just a matter of when. Now, this is one of the key concepts here. And then the bit in the middle is kind of then talking about sort of various ways of analyzing karma. The first point here is talking about, so minor karma can become large retribution. So this means, well, maybe I should say it like this. Often people will sort of say, I've heard this quite often. People are talking about like, oh, it's like physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Like, no. That's really quite incorrect and quite misleading. So a lot of people like to do this sort of Buddhism is very scientific. It's a complex issue. But the idea in physics of every action has an equal and opposite reaction is you can't apply that to karma at all. I've actually got an undergrad degree in engineering, mechanical engineering, and engineering is a lot of like just like applied physics and applied chem. And applied maths too, I guess. And so, every action has an equal opposite reaction like that. But karma doesn't work like that. You need quite a different model. A better model is to think of it like planting a seed. So if you've got those seeds and you plant it in the ground, you've got an apple seed and you plant it in the ground, it's the only thing it could possibly grow into would be an apple tree. It can't grow into a banana, it can't grow into an orange. But if you've got like one seed, how many apples is this going to result in? Now I've got an apple tree at my allotment, just down the road and around the corner. Every year it's got like when it blossoms, there are just thousands of like little apple blossoms on it. Some percentage of those actually get pollinated and form little fruit. And then before they get ripe, like even now, there's like every time there's a strong wind, lots of little apples like fall on the ground, and the ground's like covered in little tiny apples. But there's still a lot of apples on the tree, and they're slowly getting bigger. And even by the end of like the season, if we're picking hundreds of apples off this tree, if I didn't pick them, let's say if I didn't pick them and I just let them fall on the ground, how many new little baby apple trees are going to be popping up next year? I guarantee you it's not 100 little apple trees, right? There's like one next to it that I'm pretty sure must have like fallen off, and it's just like a little wild apple tree that's sprouted, because it's exactly the same type of tree. The apples are identical. So, I mean, that tree itself started from one seed. So one seed could lead to, I mean, if I like really looked after the apple tree, I could be picking hundreds of apples every year for, I don't know, many, many years. So one could lead to, I don't know, a couple of thousand, 5,000 apples, 10,000 apples. So the small cause can become a huge result, right? But it's also possible, you can think of it the other way around. Well, what if I then took, from 1 year I took 100 apples. How many apple trees can I grow? Or if I just took the 100 apples and just let them fall on the ground, how many apples might result in that? Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 10, maybe 100, maybe all of them like land in this perfectly fertile soil and they all grow, or maybe none of them, right? Maybe they all just get eaten by those pigeons. They're like my apple enemies. They like sit in this big like hazelnut tree next to it, and they're always like picking holes in my apples. It's like, you get a perfect apple with one little gunky pigeon beak mark in it. It's like, so gross. Anyway, you can just cut it off actually. So it's not every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Like you give X amount of action, you're going to get X amount of result back from that. Not at all. It depends, and you got to think of it like this developing process of like a seed and growing into a plant and how it grows, and there's so many factors. Now, this is of course a metaphor, but it's a better way of thinking about it than simply I put in X and I get X out of it. There are some actions that will have small actions that will lead to huge results, and sometimes we can also put in like huge efforts into things that don't really lead to much result at all. Complex. The main point is the action will have a result, and the relationship is going to be the same type, shall we say. So you got one apple seed, or you've got the seeds from 100 apples. They're only going to lead to apples, and they're not going to lead to oranges, and vice versa. Okay, so this is one of the core ideas here. The next one is inducing karma and completing karma. Now, this idea is another interesting idea. Now, this is more specifically actually connected to how karma goes from one lifetime to another lifetime. And maybe we should kind of like skip ahead. There's this bit up here as well that's talking about like going through samsara. And maybe we can get back to this idea here. When we're talking about like, how do we go from one life to another life, and what are the factors involved? But this idea here then of inducing karma and completing karma is that the inducing karma is kind of the karma that like throws you from this life into your next life. What basic kind of species you are, or what kind of place you are. Or, for example, in your past life, whatever you were, at some point you died, and you were then conceived to your present parents. You were conceived in your mother's womb. Now, that was a particular kind of inducing karma or throwing karma that at the time of your death there was this real powerful driving force that led you to a specific set of parents. That's your inducing karma. But your completing karma is a bit more complex. That's what happens next. So, if you think, for example, if you've got like siblings, all of your siblings had the same basic inducing karma to be reborn to the same parents, right? But then you're not the same. You and your siblings, you're not identical. And there can be massive differences between. Some people might have this inducing karma that throws into a very wealthy and rich and powerful family, but they don't actually have the completing karma to have that, and in that lifetime they might be poor and have little status. But they might have had this one action that got them there, but no other actions that could then maintain that or develop that further. Most of us, though, our karma is maybe not quite so varied, so it's a bit difficult. We're in a particular family or whatever. We don't usually change that much differently from our parents. Most of us probably stay in the same country at least as where we were born or grew up, but there can be a big variation there. So inducing karma is kind of like quite small, but it's very influential in that it gets you to that certain place. But what happens then afterwards is a bit different. So for example, inducing karma is like your plane ticket that gets you on the plane that flies you to the Greek Isles for a holiday. But your completing karma says like, and while you're there, you've got, tens of thousands of dollars, and you can stay in a 5-star hotel and go on a luxury yacht and cruise around. Or once you're there, you have absolutely no money at all. You're living at the beach in a tent, searching through dumpsters to try to find some food. You've both got the same inducing karma. You've got to that same beautiful Greek island, but you've got different completing karma as to what happens while you're there. Okay, I hope that's maybe a bit clearer. The next one, firmly fixed and not fixed karma. This is a little bit controversial, this idea, because most I think teachings would say all karma is fixed in terms of its type. So it's a bit like the apple seeds lead to apple trees, lead to apple fruit, and mango seeds lead to mango trees, lead to mango fruit, and that's fixed. That's a definite relationship. And also that, sorry, that's not really the idea of what fixed karma means. I'm sorry, ignore those last few sentences. It means something will definitely happen as a result. So usually most traditions will say, yes, karma is fixed. If you have enacted some karma, there will be a result. But there's others that sort of argue not necessarily. I like to sort of take a position sort of like this. Yes, there definitely will be a result, but it's possible to affect that result such that it might be absolutely inconsequential. So again, if we can use the seed growing, metaphor, you plant the seed, what the result of that is going to be is, it's really varied. Do you absolutely look after that plant and cherish and, treat it really well and baby it until it becomes this, beautiful tree? So you got this little like rose bush and you turn it into this prize-winning, beautiful, fragrant red roses. Or do you throw it in the backyard in a ratty, horrible pot where it doesn't get any sunshine and the soil's terrible and it's either baked by the sun or dries out, or it's flooded and it's being eaten by the bugs and the aphids? I mean, they could both come from that same one, or you could, but they grow up differently. Or, it might be that the plant grows so small and withers, it just withers. It doesn't even become really a rose plant at all. And so this is important to keep in mind. It's not that when we commit that action in the first place that the result is already like fixed fully what it will be, and it's just a matter of us like traveling through time and boom, we hit that result. Between when we do the action and when we get the result, we can affect that result along the way. So an really important example of this is to say, what if we do something that's not so good and we're like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that, that was a bad thing. Do we just go, well, but I did it, so I'm just gonna have to suffer the results, man, can't do anything about it? No, I mean, you can adjust it. So a good example of this is, so even in criminal law, right, when somebody assaults someone else or steals from them, if they go to court and they confess the crime, they are apologetic for the crime, they admit the harm, they try to undertake some kind of restorative justice, they want to pay back the victim, it might even be that, maybe the victim forgives them, and they can basically wipe out, the results of that action in that present life. They can deal with it now. And that would be very different from if they did that same crime and then just either, don't confess, or they're just totally unrepentant, or they say, I'd do it again if I had the chance, I don't care. What's the result of that going to be? I mean, the victim isn't going to be, oh, well, I forgive you. You brutally assaulted me and you want to do it again. That's fine. pretty unlikely, right? And they're going to just like make that actually worse. So things like repentance, and this is why, say particularly in East Asian Buddhism, repentance is such an important practice, and it's also like within the monastic traditions as well. The key principle being between the action and the result, it's possible to affect that. And so for negative things that we do, repentance is really good. It will mean that the result will not be anywhere near as bad. And the reverse is true as well. If we do a good deed, if you regret it, it will actually weaken it. But if you rejoice in it and say, I volunteered at my local homeless shelter and it was hard work, and it was pretty tough, but it was worth it. We were really doing some good things for those people, and I'd do it again, and I'd encourage other people to do it. And not only that, I think we need to think about our politics and what our policies are that lead to people being homeless in the first place. That action itself already is going to have a good result, but then this like developing of that, this rejoicing in a good deed will further strengthen that good result as well. So that's a really important element here of this whole notion of karma, that we can work on it and develop it. I mean, what I've just been talking about is also connected again with this idea of a minor action becoming larger, or the reverse, right? A major deed can actually become smaller depending on how we respond and what we do between the action itself and the experiencing of its results. The last point here, karma, just what gives retribution in the present life or future lives, is to say there will be a result. When that will happen is not determined. It might occur in this present life, it might occur in the next life or some subsequent lives, 1,000 lifetimes away. The key thing is it's not lost. It will happen. It's just a matter of when, and when exactly depends on all sorts of different conditions. It's really hard to give sort of a general blanket statement about that. Okay, the next bit, time's a bit short here, I don't know. Maybe we'll start on this and we'll just see how we go. This is the next verse here, verse 33. 水业报善恶无去常流转，随众或随喜，或复随意念，有业往后有，心进或相传。There is pleasant or unpleasant retribution in accordance with karma. Constant cycling through the 5 destinies is according to heavy karma, according to habitual karma, or according to recollected thoughts at death. Due to karma, one progresses to future existence, as on the exhaustion of fuel, the flame continues to burn. First line, super duper important. There is pleasant or unpleasant retribution in accordance with karma. Now, one of the important things here is to say, when we're talking about karma, the action, we classify it as like wholesome or unwholesome, or pure or impure, depending on that mental state that's driving that action, right? So this idea of wholesome or unwholesome classifies the action. It does not classify the result. The result is classified as pleasant or unpleasant, or you could say like pleasant or painful, or happy or painful, or something like that. Okay, so the action has this kind of moral assessment of like wholesome or unwholesome, but the result isn't a moral thing. Happiness isn't a moral thing. Pain is not a moral thing. Acting with wholesome intent, loving kindness, or murderous evil intent, that's a wholesome thing, right? So you're going to be really clear about separating these two. And I want to emphasize this because often you hear, there's kind of like the saying in Chinese, 善有善报，恶有恶报. So it sounds like wholesome actions lead to wholesome results. Unwholesome actions lead to unwholesome results, but technically that's really incorrect. Wholesome actions lead to pleasant results. Unwholesome actions lead to painful results. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Wholesome actions lead to pleasant results or happiness. Unwholesome actions lead to painful results, unpleasant results. So that's relationship. So your karma is this intentional driving force, and that's something that we can kind of work on, because that's kind of like our own intentions, right? Our own states of mind. But that pleasure or that pain that comes about is kind of like, you can't kind of just change that. That's almost like something we passively experience. When that result comes, it just comes. You can try to influence on the way, as we've just been talking about, but when the result comes, I mean, that's just basically what it is there. Okay, the next bit then, constant circling through the 5 destinies. So in other words, how we go from one lifetime to another lifetime, how we take rebirth. 3 main things here, and these are mainly talking about like at the time of death. So just as like, you know, what you do today is going to have quite an effect on what happens tomorrow, and it's going to have an effect on the day after. You know, you can see this just really like day by day. You can see hour by hour, minute by minute continuity in our lives, right? That's like pretty obvious. But likewise, if we take it on a slightly larger scale, what we do in one lifetime is really important to the next lifetime, and what we do right at that time of death, when the physical body dies, but the consciousness continues, links through, is really important to connecting those 2 lives together. So 3 really important types or states of mind are the most important factors, this inducing karma that we've just talked about, for where we go to in that next lifetime. So the first one is called heavy karma. So if we've in our lifetimes committed some like really heavy or powerful karma, and so it means it's driven by some very powerful force, and that could be wholesome or unwholesome, that will come up very strongly in our minds at the time of death. When we die, the mind really changes a lot compared to its normal sort of day-to-day state, like probably most of you have got now, unless you're watching this on your deathbed. If you're watching this on your deathbed, get your mind in a good space. Think of all the good things you've done. Keep that in mind. Rejoice in all your good deeds. And so it's quite possible then at death, this really powerful, it's like really deep impression within the mind. It's impressed it deeply because it's got this very powerful emotional force to it. It's going to come up and be this dominant state of mind. And that could be a driving force one way or the other. So, you know, for someone who has committed some really evil, nasty murder, for example, that could come up. Just like these impressions from that. It's probably something that, you know, even through their lives have nightmares about. That kind of thing might come up. But likewise too, someone who's done something really powerfully wholesome, you know, they fireman or firewoman, you know, or just a regular person jumping into a burning building to save a small child. Wow, man, that would like stick in your head. That would be like something like that would stay with you for your whole life, and you could be 60 years later and be on your deathbed and you'd remember that probably like perfectly clearly, this wholesome action to save another's life. That could come up and be a really powerful driving force at the time of death into the next life. If that doesn't happen, or we don't have that, what's next likely to happen is habitual karma. So things are not necessarily super powerful, but things that we do a lot. And a good one here is to think about also why right livelihood, why our jobs are so important as well. You know, I often make the case of my mother. My mother used to be a primary school teacher. For you Americans, it would be like a kindergarten school teacher. She's like 5-year-olds. And if you meet my mum, you're like, you know her for a little while, like, you're a school teacher, aren't you? And you teach little kids. She's just got it's like, I mean, maybe she was a bit like that before she even started to be a teacher, but doing that day in, day out for, I don't know, however many, at least 45 years, has shaped my mother's personality. So that kind of thing is then habitual. And that could be also a powerful driving force. Now, likewise, for Buddhist practitioners, if you've got this basic habit of reciting the Buddha's name, meditating, engaging in some, you know, other Dharma practice, and you do it every day, or you do it very regularly, it's a habitual thing that you do, that could easily be that driving force at that time of death. I mean, the mind very easily just fits into habits, right? When we're not making the mind do something specific, it just goes on to habit mode. Or if that doesn't occur, then the last one, slightly less likely, is just whatever state of mind you are at the time of death. And it could be something totally different. And this is kind of why, at least for East Asian Buddhism, I think most Buddhist traditions, it's really important. You don't want to die uncarefully. Keep your mind focused on something good. So in East Asian Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism, you've got chanting. Have your Dharma practitioner, your Dharma buddies come in, chant the Buddha's name. Get you chanting as well. Focus. Put up an image of the Buddha. Remind you of the good deeds that you've done, so that you don't just have this normally like a really nice person, and for some reason maybe you're in hospital and you're all stuffed full of drugs and you're a bit uncomfortable and you get a bit grumpy or angry with the poor nurse, and in that state of anger you die, and that becomes your inducing karma. Oh no, you don't want that. I mean, that could also be a good thing as well if somebody's really bad. If you could a lifetime of evil and you can get them at the last minute, make them think of something nice, yeah, that would be good. But on the whole, you want to make sure that at the time of death the mind is on a good thing, and that of course comes out with, have you done that regularly, or have you done that very powerfully? That heavy karma or habitual karma. Don't underlook how powerful that is to driving us from one life to the next life. Last point here, due to karma, one progresses to future existence. That's just what we've been talking about, is on the exhaustion of the fuel, the flame continues to burn. So the idea here that's like the fuel, maybe the wood, piece of firewood, is like the body. Even when the body dies, it's burnt up, the flame can continue. Can jump onto another piece of wood and keep on burning. And so the mind is like the flame, this kind of intangible thing. But I mean, in theory, you could keep a flame going indefinitely, right? I mean, it's kind of... it's possible. Like the Olympic torch, it just keeps on burning. Whereas the body itself is this temporary physical thing. Okay, now, we've been talking today quite a bit about karma. We've been talking about different forms of karma, how all actions, intentional actions, will have a result. It's not equal and opposite, not even opposite or equal. Small karmas can be developed into powerful results, but also big karmas can also be reduced in terms of their results, depending on what we do between the action and the result. We talked about inducing karma in a lot of detail, which throws us at the end of this life into our next rebirth, and this is quite important. And we talked about the fact that karma will come about as a result, but it just depends when exactly. And that was the main gist, I think, then of today. I think time to wrap it up here. I'm a bit over time. Oh no, I've gone over my usual 30-minute limit. We'll see you again next week. We'll be continuing with more stuff about right view. We're going to be talking about the difference between the sages, the wise people, and just regular kind of ignorant people like me stuck in samsara, and why that acknowledging that difference is important, and all sorts of other stuff too. Right view is our focus for these next few weeks. Thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you again next week. Bye bye.